Ever since we started grade school, we've all been told that we need a big, strong government to look after us. And that, sure, it may need fixing here and there, but generally today's government size is about right. We disagree. We think that government is a parasite, living off what you and I earn and using our money to do unpleasant things to us. From being a nation of self-reliant go-getters, America is fast becoming a country of government junkies. We think an alternative exists, one that puts you back in charge of your own life and destiny. We call it the freedom alternative.
In the supreme law of our land, we'll examine just why it is that we seem to be surrounded on all sides by petty little laws that tin god politicians love to write, and what we can do to protect ourselves. Our guest will be Andrew Melechinsky of Enfield, a nationally known advocate of a return to constitutional law. But first, a quick comment on a particularly ugly aspect of the Gulf War. Worse may have happened before you see this program. We're recording on January 29th. But a few days ago, the government of Iraq deliberately pumped crude oil into the Persian Gulf, causing the worst ecological disaster of its kind, 12 times worse, we're told, than the Exxon Valdez tragedy in Alaska. These seagulls, as they desperately clung to the last few moments of their lives, could not know whether the oil in which they were choking was spilled by accident from an oil tanker or on purpose from a tank farm. But we do. And unlike them, we can and should do something about it. Let's contrast the two cases. The Alaskan spill was accidental, possibly careless. The Kuwaiti one was deliberate. The Alaskan spill was done by private capitalist company greedy for profits. The Kuwaiti one by a responsible socialist government dedicated to the public good. The company in Alaska had bought and paid for their oil. The Iraqi government had stolen theirs under force of arms. The Exxon company spent a fortune trying its best to clean up its mess. The government in Iraq hasn't lifted a finger to clean up theirs. Exxon had a strong motive not to spill oil, for they wanted to make profits by selling it. The government had only political motives, and those caused them to foul up the planet and kill millions of its creatures. Make no mistake, we are very concerned about the environment in the freedom movement, and that's why we think leaving it in the hands of any government is a disastrous error. Self-appointed leaders of environmentalism like Jane Fonda and the Sierra Club urge us to trust government to keep it clean. We say that's like setting the fox to guard the henhouse. Unfettered, private, capitalist ownership of a natural resource gives the owner a clear and direct motive to conserve it for the long term. Profits. No stronger motive has yet been found. Only one alternative exists: control of those resources by politicians. In contrast, their sole motivation is to so favor the currently most powerful lobby that they win the next election. Their future plans never extend further than 6 years. Iraq's government spilled this oil because the U.S. government intervened and waged war. Our government did that because you elected it. Next time you enter a polling booth, please remember these pictures of seagulls drowning in government oil. Like the war itself, the Gulf disaster was caused only by politicians, Republican and Democrat both. We hope that you will firmly resolve never to support either again.
Hello, I'm Jim Davies from Ridgefield. Let's turn now from the obscenity of how governments use their power to the obscenity of how they get it. That's right, taxation. And we'll go from big governments at war to the little ones fooling around right here in Connecticut. In recent years, voters in one town after another in western Connecticut have rejected the bloated budgets of their town politicians, and no one has been more active in forming a movement out of that trend than a former guest on our show, Billy Michael of Bethel. He and Fred Stant of Brookfield formed the Citizens for Limited Taxation, and this fine group is spreading its influence eastwards. I went along recently to their convention in the Treadway Hartford Hotel in Cromwell, and here are a few of the remarks Billy made as business began.
A year ago, I spoke before the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education in this same room, and when I was here, I looked around and I said, you know, if we don't organize the way the boards of education are organized, we don't stand a chance. So it was something that was going on. The tax revolt in our area, Lower Fairfield County, occurred around 1985-86. 9 towns in that year went to referendum when we were in the height of our economic boom. Our property values were escalating, and I picked up immediately on that. I said, Jesus, if we can knock 9 budgets down now, wait till things get bad. And everything that we've been saying came true, and of course this whole thing is spread statewide. But
it's a great movement, and we wish Billy all the success in the world. The magnitude of the task before him was shown well by Senator Jim Maloney of Bethel, who told the convention that he was a Jeffersonian Democrat. That's a title I wouldn't mind being used for me. Someone who believes in very, very limited government, and in its abolition, like Jefferson's Declaration of Independence says, if it fails to stay within clearly stated limits. Trouble is, when I asked Maloney what he thought of the bureaucratic rule of 2, he said he'd never heard of it. For a politician intent on reducing spending, that's almost criminal. The rest of us can, of course, be excused. But in case you're not familiar with it, the bureaucratic rule of 2 says that it costs us about 2 times as much to buy a service from government than it would from a free, unregulated capitalist market. It's been measured, and that's the factor. So, if any politician is serious about reducing spending, all he need do is to privatize one function of government after another. And Jim Maloney, who I think is a hypocrite, had never heard of that. Even worse, he showed no interest in learning more about it. Worse yet, perhaps, was the performance of Mike Levin, whose research group, the Connecticut Public Expenditure Council, does provide a most valuable source of information about government spending. He is generally known as being strongly sympathetic to reducing taxes and spending. In some ways, the best kind of member of the establishment you're likely to find. After having spoken at length to the convention about the need to cut government spending by taking functions away from it, here's how he responded when I took him at his word and put a question from the floor.
Yeah, delighted you have put the accent on reducing spending. Delighted that to hear your remarks a little while ago that there are some things that state government should not be doing, and that's where we should be looking. Last time I looked, the state of Connecticut was spending about 60% of its budget on health, education, and welfare. Can you think of any good reason why the state should continue to be involved in health, education, or welfare? And if not, why do we not advocate that and reduce the state budget by 60%?
Well, you were the one who wrote the article of the paper that time, right?
I'm delighted.
He writes letters.
I mean, that's 2.5 years ago. I'm delighted you're
I don't think you're well, you might be delighted I remember, which I do, but I don't agree with that philosophy. You see, because, well, that's the libertarian philosophy. You know, the state has a reason to be in the education business. I believe in public education.
Why?
I can't say the state.
You believe in public education? Why? You believe in public education when it's such a failure, Michael? For God's sake.
Public education has some problems, but I can't justify saying we can't be in the education or health or welfare business. That's a legitimate.
Well, what are the reasons, though? The question was, why should we not get out of
Being in business, that's the problem right there. Eliminate all the businesses that the state has, and you'll be back where you're supposed to be.
The job of the state is to protect the parent's right to do with his life what he wants, not to tell him what to do.
Notice he totally failed to answer the question. That is, why should the state do these things in health, education, and welfare? Later, he even called my ideas wacko, quote. Unfortunately, my tape had run out, so I could not record the shouting match that followed that across the convention floor. Since we're not allowed to broadcast naughty words on this channel, perhaps it's just as well. Point is, established politicians like these two are utterly untrustworthy. Even when they seem to be agreeing with you, perhaps especially then, you have to junk the lot and start over.
And now for our main feature of the program. It is my great pleasure to introduce our featured guest this week. He's Andrew Melechinsky of Enfield. Andrew probably knows more about the Constitution of the United States than any other person, at least more than any other who believes in its authority. He is founder and president of Constitutional Revival, a group dedicated to making all of us more aware of what the Constitution is and how important it is to each of us. And now let's join Jim Davies and Andrew Melechinsky in the studio.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Freedom Alternative.
It's a pleasure, Jim.
I wonder if we could consider the case that one of our viewers or myself, we just got a communication from the government. We don't like it. It may ask us to pay money or appear in court or something like that. If I would have that and go to a government licensed attorney, one of the regular sort, I would feel a little uncomfortable because, after all, he's got a license from the government. I don't really want to go to the person beholden to my adversary. Are you licensed by the government?
Of course not.
So you don't have that problem, therefore, if I came to you.
That's right. I do not have that problem. They're not apt to pay any attention to me because they have given themselves a monopoly on the practice of law. But nevertheless, it would be a disadvantage if I accepted their license and I have to work from the premise that eventually they'll honor my right to speak for or with you in any way you want me to.
You could give me some unbiased advice on the subject.
I think so.
Yeah, great.
Well, it would be biased in favor of the Constitution.
I hope so. And let's come then to how it comes about that you are knowledgeable about the Constitution. What, if you like, your qualifications to advise me?
Well, Jim, I came back from 2 wars in which I genuinely fought for my country. I believed I did the right thing. And after I got back, I discovered that many of the evils I perceived in the systems I was fighting are present right here. And when I went to court to get redress, I continually got stymied, and I couldn't understand why for the longest time. And eventually I discovered that the lawyers were operating under a completely different system than the Constitution provides for. And that system is killing all of us, in effect, because we cannot truly get redress for grievances.
This is a pretty devastating indictment of
the system. Yes, it is. That's why I wear this
what's
badge.
What's that you got there on the badge? I was going to ask.
That's why I wear it, because...
What does it say,
Judges, lawyers, and politicians are scum. Those are the 3 categories.
It says criminal there, I think.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, I've got another one that says scum, and my son has me wear this one because
criminal's more polite, right?
It's more polite, right.
Why would you say they're criminals?
Because they're breaking the law consistently. The law says that you and I are to be protected from the very nasty things they're doing to us. And we're not supposed to have to fight for our rights that heavily. All we're required to do under the Constitution is go to the authorities and say, look, I've been wronged, and I want something done about it. Then they're supposed to take the ball. They're supposed to investigate, report back to us what they have discovered about, what was done to us that we consider wrong. If it's not wrong, they're supposed to say so and why, so that we could then argue those points if necessary. But they don't. They normally will not even accept our complaints.
Let's help me and help our viewers to understand what this Constitution is, this document. Is it I was talking with a friend of mine the other day and talking about the Gulf War, the Persian Gulf War, and I suggested to him that there was no authority in the Constitution for the government to go in and intervene in a quarrel between Iraq and Kuwait.
Well, you're right.
And he said, well, show me the place where it says they can't.
Sure. Amendment 10, for one thing. Amendment 10 says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the people.
So if it isn't, let me get this right, if it isn't in the Constitution that the government can do something, automatically, therefore, it cannot do it. Is that correct?
Not automatically. That's what the Constitution states, emphatically.
I'm talking what the Constitution says, and it's for, yes. I know it doesn't actually happen today.
The powers not delegated are reserved.
Okay.
So if it's not there, the U.S. doesn't have it.
Now, the Constitution does authorize the government, the federal government, for example, to defend the United States, does it not?
Defend against insurrection and rebellion,
okay.
Yes. But that's within our borders.
That's within our borders.
And you might stretch your point and say, well, we have to send missiles back if somebody's sending them to us. You can stretch your point that way and say we have to go beyond our borders in certain limited cases.
But only in order as a defensive action.
As a defensive action, yes.
Right.
Otherwise, there is no authority in the Constitution for the president to send troops over to Saudi Arabia or any place else.
Okay.
More than that, I'd still like to know where the declaration of war is. It's an absolute necessity.
There's that as well.
We still don't have that. And when these radio announcers say, you know, this our war with this, our war with that, I say, what war? We haven't declared it yet. And here they are throwing all kinds of money away, sacrificing our lives, our equipment, and no war.
So the Constitution is intended to place strict limits then on government.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Very much so.
And they appear at the moment largely to be ignoring them. Is that
Yes.
your judgment?
They have been doing it for years, and people like me didn't catch on because I had been thoroughly indoctrinated by the public school system into thinking the government could do no wrong.
My friend
That
was
took
not
me a long
only
time to catch on.
My friend I referred to was not only a graduate of the public school system, he was a teacher in it for 20 years.
Right. Then we start to understand why he's still loyal to that Mickey Mouse setup in which people are actually destroyed, killed, maimed, and no justification for it. I challenge you to tell me what somebody has done to us that would justify our sending that many troops over there.
On several previous occasions on this program, we've asked exactly that question, found no answer, whatever.
Figures.
I think so. Let's take then, let's try and hypothesize an example here. Let's take an example that our viewers might get into. It might be a traffic ticket they've got from the government that says they were revolving their wheels at some incorrect speed or something without it. Let's assume that they were not endangering anybody. So there's no case that we were behaving improperly, injuring somebody or endangering them, but we've broken some law.
Assumption, Jim, you said that they couldn't pull anybody over. They have no authority to.
I was going to ask, what happens if a cop pulls you over, and as somebody did to me, one of them did to me a year or two back, and says, I want to see the radar detector that you had in your dashboard 100 yards back there.
Yes,
what would you advise?
No authority to do that.
What should I do there?
Well, if you've got the nerve for it and you're well educated in the area, you ask him for his warrant, because it takes a warrant to interfere with your actions in any way, shape, or form.
Where does it say that in the Constitution?
Amendment 4 and 5.
Could you read a bit of that?
I think I could.
This is in fact a reprint, not of the Bill of Rights.
Yes, it is.
And,
I have several here.
I can see there's a bundle. Would you be willing to let some of these out of
That's what I brought
your
for.
possession? So if anybody would like to obtain a copy of the Bill of Rights that Andy's holding here, the number to call is 1-257-4844, and we'll be pleased to put you folk in touch and get a copy.
Well, here's Amendment 4,
for
instance. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches or seizures shall not be violated. Is anything left out?
Searches and seizures. Searches. So this cop, I mean, one of my effects was my car, another was an alleged radar detector. I better watch my words here.
Right.
And both of them were mine.
Yeah.
There was no question about that. And he pulled me
you
over.
were forced over to the curb.
Yeah.
You were stopped in your absolute right to go from here to there unmolested. Those policemen are supposed to protect you from the very things that they're doing.
Oh, he was armed.
I know.
He'd got a uniform on.
And if he used those arms to protect you from that other policeman, or if another policeman came up and said, beat it, then he'd be doing his job.
Yeah. Now, what would happen if, I don't think on that occasion I did, but supposing I had said, let me see your warrants, please, what would then happen?
Well, he might grab you, open up the door of the car, pull you out, slam you into the ground, sit on your back, or another policeman drives up and helps him to do it. I know people that have had that happen. I've had other people say, I challenge your authority, and the policeman went and sat in his car for about 5 minutes, drove off. My friend said, I just drove away too. So there's extremes in what happens.
Yeah, it's difficult
But it's good to know what you have a right to do. As you, in most cases, most people won't push the point because they don't relish the thought of being arbitrarily grabbed and slammed to the ground.
No, right.
So,
would you recommend politeness in these circumstances?
Oh, always politeness.
Always polite, but nonetheless firm?
Firm if possible, yes.
So let's take the story a stage further. And this really happens, doesn't it? I mean, we're not making this up.
Oh, yes. Every time I see a car pull over to the side of the road with a policeman there, I say, that poor fella, he's really in for it because he's been attacked by a highwayman. In most instances, I say 99 times out of 100, there is absolutely no justification for forcing the man to the side of the road.
We are not, of course, advocating that anybody using the road or anything else should endanger another human being.
Well, that's the point. That's when the policeman's supposed to pull you over to stop a clear danger to somebody else.
Right.
When he sees you endangering somebody, then is when his job comes into play. That's when
Okay.
he should do something.
Let's take this sequence a little further. We've challenged his authority. He has ignored the challenge. And very frequently they will do that. What happens next in the conversation?
Well, there's a million ways you can go, Jim, and a lot of us are learning these various ways. And I use the pure approach where I rely on the Constitution itself. And I'll actually send papers into the court saying that, you know, the court has no authority over me.
Excuse me, you're jumping a little ahead.
Yeah.
The guy has asked me to produce an alleged radar detector. Do I produce it?
Of course not.
What happens then? What is he likely to do?
Well, sometimes he'll say, follow me to the police station. Sometimes he'll say, you know, let me have your license, and then he confiscates your license. He steals it because he has no right to do that. And then he says, follow me to the station.
Where does it say you can't, just to rehearse this, where does it say you can't confiscate the license?
No person shall be deprived of property.
In amendment number?
4.
You got it. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there's all kinds of laws here which
Actually,
protect
they would,
our rights.
wouldn't
Yeah.
they say, though, that the license isn't yours, it's the state of Connecticut's? Is
How
that
can they? Why did they give it to you? Why did you pay for it? By the way, if you want my personal view,
Yeah.
licensing is unconstitutional. All that little piece of paper is a certificate of competency. And under the Constitution, that's all it can be.
You can drive safely.
Yeah, that way you save the inconvenience of that time when something does happen where you might be at fault. The policeman's not going to hold on to you to find out who you are first. He'll see your certificate of competency and you say, okay, you're presumed to be competent, therefore we'll let this be settled in court.
Okay.
That's what that license is supposed to be.
Okay. So he may confiscate it. You're going to wind up in court eventually, right?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Not always.
Well, okay. Let's presume you do. I did on this particular occasion, I think.
Okay.
What would you suggest to somebody who asked your opinion, or perhaps we should put it this way around, if you were in that position and you appeared in court on a charge of carrying or operating illegally a radar detector, contrary to some statute that they wrote in Hartford, what would you then do as the case was called?
Well, I would challenge their jurisdiction, both beforehand on paper and then in the court itself. And normally I stay outside the railing in order to do that. You don't have to.
Interesting. Outside the railing?
Yes.
What's the significance of that?
To show them that they don't have jurisdiction over my person. Because constitutionally, they can't even order you into court without the permission of a jury.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of people go in and they've gotten in the habit to the point where everybody thinks you've got to go to court once you're summoned. Constitutionally, absolutely not.
Okay.
Constitutionally, it takes a jury of your peers who decide that there's enough evidence to justify having a trial before you can be ordered into court.
Yeah.
It's a bit strong and it's a bit way out to most people, but this is constitutionally proper. And when you stop to think about it, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have the policemen chasing all these non-criminals and the criminals getting away scot-free. I want them to go after the criminals.
Sure. Okay, well, in this courtroom scene that we imagine then, here might just challenge the jurisdiction of the court, and the judge might say something like, too bad you're here anyway.
Well, I would say, you know, basically, just, sir, you can't plead for me. I'm challenging the jurisdiction of the court. Now you've got to establish that before you can go any further. If you can manage that, it's a very scary situation.
I know it's scary.
It's hard to do, but basically that's what you should do. Just do not plead and do not let him plead for you. I'll give you where it went on further if you'd like to illustrate this, and that is the next time I went to court, the judge asked me again, you know, what's your pleasure, Mr. Melechinsky? And I said, well, for one thing, we have to have my attorney here.
Yeah?
And he says, your attorney? Looked at me so strange because you and I don't believe in attorneys. You know? I says, yes, you entered a plea for me last time. Now you got to defend me. And he quickly continued that case, and that's one of the ones that was dismissed, by the way.
So he had forcibly, entered a plea on your behalf against your wishes.
And he had absolutely no right to do so. He broke the law when he did that.
Hence the badge you're wearing again. He's a criminal.
That's part of the reason for this badge,
yes. I understand.
Oh, yes.
The case then has moved along to the point that you're arguing it. Would you argue the case, or would you stay silent? What technique would you recommend?
Well, I used to say stay silent until I got more knowledge of the subject. Now I say I'm going to argue as best I can or conduct my case as best I can, now that you're proceeding against me, because I know that from experience that I'm going to get hurt by being silent. So I have more to gain from handling my case than I do from staying silent. And so I handle my case, and then I point out to the jury every chance I get that they're breaking the law and how they're breaking the law.
Oh, by the way, there isn't a jury. Sorry about that. In the case where I'm recalling a real case here, there was no jury. And one of the first things I said is that I demand a jury trial and will not proceed until I get one.
And then he broke the law and said you're going to have a judge trial.
Yeah,
and
that's
I'd
what he
like to
told me.
know where you can find authority for that, Jim. There is no authority for a judge trial.
I couldn't find any.
Absolutely none. Trial of all crimes shall be by jury. That's pretty darn clear.
Now, that's in amendment number...
Well, that's in Article 3 of the Constitution.
Oh, yeah?
And then the Amendment 6 says, in all criminal prosecutions, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. And also it's in the Connecticut Constitution that the right of trial by jury shall remain inviolate. So when you read all these provisions carefully, you realize that there's just no way that they can get you into that court except if you're dumb enough to do what 99.999 of all people do. You walk in there, stand at that line and say, "What's your pleasure, Your Honor?" And then you gave them jurisdiction simply by going in there.
Incidentally, on the subject of jurisdiction, I'm going back and forth a bit here, but I learned at that particular case that if you sign the ticket at the roadside, they claim that that gives them jurisdiction. Is that so?
Well, it could. It's still a false jurisdiction in that the whole system is fraudulent and therefore invalid. But it'll still stick for some time to come because, as you can tell, this is a momentous problem we've got here.
You bet.
But basically, if the policeman says, "You'll sign or else I'll hit you over the head," or "You'll sign or I'll drag you and put you in a cell," then you put down "under duress" above where your signature's going to go, and then sign your name.
Very good.
Under protest, under duress. You know, if you're somebody like me.
Yeah. When arguing this particular hypothetical case, would you perhaps challenge the right of the Connecticut legislators to write a law on the subject of radar detectors? I couldn't understand where this came from anyway.
Well, they never did. There is no such law.
I believe that there is something written down. I don't know if it's valid or not.
The law that they quote, I've researched it pretty thoroughly.
What does it say?
The law that they quote says that the commissioner shall have the power to regulate safety devices.
Oh?
Oh. That's what it says. Look it up for yourself.
Oh, really?
And that's what they're persecuting people under. Of course, most cases die before they ever get very high, when somebody really challenges
the case
them.
does.
And that's one of the reasons
that
they have found out themselves in trying to make it stick on appeal with some of the people that I know, that the law does not regulate radar detectors at all. It doesn't even mention radar detectors. It simply says he has the right to regulate safety devices. And even that's basically unconstitutional. But it's good to know that there is nothing about radar detectors in that statute.
I know that. The case we're speaking of revolved around whether I had produced this for the policeman to see under duress or not. And I did establish that I had produced it under duress, and the judge threw the case out because it was I'm not to be forced to give evidence against myself. It was a straightforward
And that's something else that bothers me and shows how perverted the system is. Assuming that you committed a genuine crime, assuming you did harm to somebody, and that officer got evidence by violating your rights, they're still supposed to use that evidence because they now know that you've committed a crime. And then they're supposed to prosecute the officer for obtaining that evidence unlawfully.
Andrew, this has been totally fascinating. We could go on for hours. Time has run out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jay.
Let us summarize what we've learned. Number one, if you're harassed by the government and need help with the law, remember, every regular attorney is obliged to favor your adversary. Number two, instead of protecting us, the present court system actually violates the supreme law of the land. Number three, properly, under that supreme law, if the Constitution doesn't authorize something, the government can't do it. Number four, unless you're actually doing harm to someone, the police have no right to stop you. Number five, if you're hauled into court and are innocent, number one, don't sign the ticket. Number two, challenge its jurisdiction. And number three, refuse to plead. For the Freedom Alternative, I'm Peter Verderosa. Join us next week.